Hey guys, tonight we're taking a gentle, drowsy tumble into the most outrageously gilded panic attack history ever produced. The pre-revolutionary French aristocracy. That's right, tonight you'll drift off not to rain on a peasant's roof, but to the sound of diamonds clinking in a golden chamber pot. If you've ever wondered what it was like to have more wigs than friends, or why a cake could start a riot, you're about to find out. Before you surrender to this bedtime buffet of decadence, take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment, but only if you actually enjoy falling asleep to the sound of other people's overdue credit cards. Tell me where you're listening from and whether your pajamas have less embroidery than a minor French duchess's socks. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. What did it feel like to wear a dress so wide you needed your own doorway? Did the rich really eat cake for breakfast, lunch, and emotional support? How many fountains can you fit in one garden before it becomes a municipal water crisis? Could you sleep knowing your powdered face might suffocate you, or that your neighbors, armed with pitchforks and baguettes, were getting ideas? And most importantly, how much gold-plated nonsense does it take before your entire country decides, you know what, let's just try guillotines instead? Congratulations, you've just woken up in Versailles, 1788. The cheese is rich, the air is scented with rosewater and existential dread, and you're already late for a party that started last week. Let's see how long you last before someone invents a revolution just to stop you talking about yourself. You awake not to an alarm clock, but to a servant gently rattling a porcelain chamber pot, because in Versailles, even bathroom breaks come with an audience. Forget showers. A true aristocrat cleanses with expensive perfume, powder, and at least 3 people watching. Soap? That's for peasants. Here, cleanliness is something you wear, not something you are. The morning sun creeps across your silk canopy, filtered through windows too valuable to open. Outside, birds trill, but inside, the only sound is the discreet cough of a chambermaid waiting for you to roll over. You don't so much get out of bed as emerge, like a slightly stale croissant, from a cocoon of embroidered linens. There is no privacy. Not now, not ever. Versailles etiquette says you're supposed to be seen at all times, even when your first act of the day is letting someone else empty your night vase. Your first visitor isn't a friend, it's your valet, carrying a ewer of lukewarm rosewater. It smells divine, which is helpful, since it's not doing much actual cleaning. You dip your hands and maybe touch your face, more out of tradition than necessity. The towel you're handed is softer than your political opinions. If you're truly committed, you'll dab a little extra water behind your ears, just enough to say, yes, I'm fresh, but not enough to risk removing yesterday's carefully layered powder. Now the real hygiene routine begins, which, for a French aristocrat, is a kind of public performance art. The first act, perfume. Your dressing table groans under the weight of tiny glass bottles imported from every country that still talks to France. Lavender, violet, ambergris, orange blossom, if it can be distilled, it's in a vial somewhere on your shelf. You don't spritz so much as marinate, layering scent upon scent like you're trying to smother the memory of last night's party. If you catch a whiff of anything human, you haven't used enough. Next comes the powder. You sit, eyes half shut, while your maid pats a cloud of finely milled lead onto your face, neck, and any skin not already encased in velvet. Powder is your sunscreen, foundation, and vaguely toxic barrier against reality. It's not enough to look clean. You must look ethereal, like you died of something expensive. Bonus points if your wig is also dusted white, because nothing says I am healthy and vibrant like resembling a marble bust with seasonal allergies. Of course, if you're truly elite, you have a separate person for each cosmetic process. One for powder, one for rouge, one for the little black velvet patches you stick to your cheeks to hide smallpox scars and start rumors. By 8 a.m., your face is less a face and more a lightly frosted cake. Teeth? You gesture for your servant to bring over the tooth powder, a gritty blend of burnt bread, salt, and maybe a hint of mint if you're lucky. Brushing is less about oral health and more about status. You're wealthy enough to afford the powder, the brush, and the time. If you're missing a few molars, don't worry, so is everyone else. Just smile less. Or turn your head like you're always about to be painted. Finally, you're presented with a selection of wigs. Tall, taller, and what architectural period is this? Your natural hair, such as it is hurriedly slicked back and covered. Wigs are styled, perfumed, and occasionally infested, but it's all part of the charm. You wonder idly if today's style will get caught in a chandelier. By now, the room is filling with courtiers who pretend not to notice you in your undergarments. The show is almost over. One more spray of perfume, a pat of powder to the nose, a glance in the mirror. You don't look clean, you look important, and in Versailles, that's all that matters. The day has barely begun, and already you're exhausted. But hey, at least you smell like you haven't worked a day in your life. Because here, that's the whole point. Before breakfast, you're buried alive under 3 layers of silk, a mountain of lace, and a wig so tall you risk low-flying birds. Everyone stares, but not because you look good, just because they're worried about wind shear. And yes, you do need a servant just for your hat. It starts with the underpinnings, a word that sounds delicate, but really just means layers of fabric you'll never escape. First, your linen chemise, the closest thing you'll get to pajamas all week. Over that, a corset, laced so tightly that breathing is less an option and more a privilege. Every day you gamble with your internal organs just to look like you swallowed a wooden plank. Your maid pulls the strings until your waist is the diameter of a dinner plate and your ribs are sending hate mail to your spine. Next comes the petticoats, 1, 2, maybe 5 if you're feeling optimistic about not needing to sit down. These aren't for warmth, they're for volume. The goal isn't comfort, but to occupy as much space as physically possible. You're not just wearing a dress, you're piloting it. The sound of your skirts swishing across the parquet floors is less elegant lady and more approaching thunderstorm. If you try to pass through a doorway, you must approach sideways and hope your wig clears the frame. Every movement is a negotiation with gravity. Your dress, once finally secured, is a monument to over-design. Bows, ruffles, tiny buttons, pearls, maybe an entire bird if you're feeling whimsical. Your sleeves are so wide that you could smuggle snacks, small pets, or an entire second outfit. The fabric is imported, the dye expensive, and the craftsmanship so detailed it makes you wonder if the seamstresses have tiny, angry goblins helping them at night. And this is just your day wear. Formal events demand something truly catastrophic. Now, on to the main attraction. The wig. Your real hair is twisted, pinned, and banished, so that the glorious pile of horsehair and powder can claim its throne. Today's style? Maybe the poof, a mountain of curls reaching for the heavens, decorated with silk flowers, porcelain figurines, or, for the truly avant-garde, a tiny ship sailing in a sea of curls. Your head feels like it's hosting a small wedding party, and every step is an act of balance. Rumor has it one duchess lost consciousness when her wig absorbed too much rainwater, doubling its weight and her medical bills. You, meanwhile, just pray not to encounter a strong gust on the terrace. The powder comes next, and not just on your face, oh no, your wig gets its own blizzard of scented flour or finely ground starch, which you try not to inhale. Powdering is an ordeal. It settles everywhere. Your clothes, your skin, your breakfast. At Versailles, there's no such thing as a black outfit. It's white by the end of the hour. You'll spend the day leaving a faint dust trail, like a very fancy, increasingly tired moth. And what about accessories? Shoes are tiny, satin-wrapped torture devices with heels so high you envy the stability of a teetering goat. Jewelry is less adornment and more structural support. Pearls, sapphires, and cameos dangle from ears and wrists, clinking in time with your pulse. As for hats, well, that's a whole other event. Feathers, ribbons, the occasional taxidermy surprise. You need a servant to balance your headpiece while you duck under chandeliers. By the time you're dressed, you are no longer a person. You are a walking, sighing installation art piece. And the point isn't just to look rich. It's to look richer, heavier, and more inconvenient than everyone else. If you can't see the envy in someone's eyes as you wobble past, you might as well go home and try again. The irony? The weight of your look isn't just physical. It's the invisible, crushing burden of knowing every lace-trimmed, pearl-crusted, gravity-defying inch of your wardrobe is just another reason the crowd outside is loading their pitchforks. But hey, at least your wig's still on straight. For now. Your first meal arrives on a silver platter featuring a tiny coffee, 6 pastries, and a cheese selection that could bankrupt a small nation. The bread is white, the eggs are rare, and you're already bored. All of this, of course, eaten while sitting up in bed, surrounded by 3 bored relatives pretending to care. You don't wake up hungry, you wake up obligated. At Versailles, breakfast is less about satisfying your appetite and more about staging a performance in a room full of silk drapery and judgmental ancestors staring down from the wallpaper. Servants glide in with the subtlety of well-trained cats. Setting down plates with a bow so low, you start to worry they'll never get back up. The air is thick with the mingled scents of fresh-baked bread, warm milk, and generational anxiety. The menu, of course, is a declaration of status. Your coffee is so rare and precious it's poured into a porcelain cup painted with scenes of people who are definitely not drinking coffee. The sugar is imported, probably smuggled, and guarded more closely than the crown jewels. You sprinkle a few grains, enough to show you can afford to sweeten things, not enough to risk running out before the week's end. Each pastry is a minor architectural marvel. Golden croissants, buttery brioche, and flaky pain au chocolat, all arranged just so, as if the royal pastry chef is angling for a spot in the Louvre. Eating them, you wonder if this is what happiness tastes like, or if it's just the butter talking. The cheese selection is so extravagant you need a map to navigate it. Wheels of brie, wedges of comté, and soft goat cheeses spread across the platter like a who's who of dairy royalty. The cheese is so fresh, it might actually be illegal in some countries. You spread it generously on your bread, knowing that somewhere a peasant is gnawing on bark and wondering why his taxes are so high this year. Your relatives, meanwhile, hover at the edges of your bed like vultures at a picnic, each one hoping to get through the meal without being reminded that their inheritance is mostly theoretical. Conversation is stilted, punctuated by the clink of silver and the awkward clearing of throats. Someone brings up the weather. Always a safe choice when no one wants to talk about last night's gambling losses or the suspicious absence of the family jewels. There's always one cousin pretending to read a book and another poking at a quail egg like it might explode. Everyone's waiting for you to finish first, because etiquette says nobody can leave until you do. You briefly consider dragging out the meal just to punish them for existing. You're supposed to eat slowly and elegantly, but by the third pastry, you're mostly shoving things into your mouth while making polite conversation about topics you hope nobody remembers. The bread is impossibly white, a color reserved for the truly wealthy. It's soft enough to make you wonder if anyone has actually chewed it in a generation. You remember reading somewhere that peasants' bread was brown and laced with sawdust. Here, the only wood is in the hand-carved bedposts you're leaning against. If you're feeling virtuous, you might order a soft-boiled egg. Eggs are scarce, delicate, and apparently come with their own social ranking. Quail is for the chic, duck is for the avant-garde, chicken is for those who've run out of imagination. The yolk is golden, the whites are trembling, and the whole experience is over in 2 bites, which is about how long your attention span lasts. When breakfast ends, you're not satisfied, you're simply finished. You pass your cup to a waiting servant, dab your lips with a napkin embroidered by people whose lives you'll never think about, and listen to your stomach sigh with relief. The meal isn't about nourishment. It's about maintaining an illusion, one where butter solves every problem, and debt is just a rumor that happens to other people. You rise, ready to face the day, full of empty calories and even emptier promises. If decadence were a food group, you'd never need to eat again. Nature calls, but nature has to wait until the palace's official rising. Your chamber pot is porcelain, hand-painted, and emptied by someone who dreams of revolution. Toilets exist, but etiquette says you're supposed to ignore them, just like taxes and peasants. You don't simply wake up and rush to the bathroom. There's a strict pecking order for relieving yourself at Versailles. And, in the end, no one wins except the person with the strongest nose. The day begins with the gentle clink of porcelain as your chamber pot is presented like a rare gemstone. It's not just a pot, it's a statement piece, festooned with gold filigree and tiny painted cherubs who, in a stroke of cosmic irony, are also in the act of relieving themselves. Your valet stands by, ready to assist, because the art of aristocratic toileting is apparently too refined for just one person. If you're particularly fashionable, you might have a close stool, a fancy padded box with a hidden compartment brought right to your bedside. The commode is so ornate it could double as a side table, which it often does, much to the confusion of houseguests who accidentally rest a cup of chocolate on top. Discretion is supposed to be everything, but at Versailles, privacy is more theoretical than real. If you think you'll be alone for even a second, you're wrong. The rising ritual means there's always at least one servant, a distant cousin, and, for reasons no one can explain, an official from the royal laundry nearby. As you conduct your business, there's polite conversation about the weather, the price of grain, and sometimes the unfortunate rumor that the Dauphin's pot was chipped last Tuesday. You begin to wonder if you're living in a palace or just an extremely well-funded fishbowl. Now, if you're a guest and need to go, things get more complicated. Versailles was famously designed without an overabundance of permanent toilets. Instead, you wander down endless mirrored corridors in search of a hidden nook, a closet, an alcove, sometimes just a strategically placed screen where a chamber pot awaits, probably recently vacated by someone with a much fancier title than you. If you're lucky, you'll find a spot that's only lightly used. If not, well, welcome to the world's most awkward game of musical chairs. Some rooms have commodes disguised as chairs, ornate, velvet-upholstered seats with a secret. You might sit down thinking you're being invited to tea, only to discover, a moment later, that tea is not on the menu. Don't worry, though. An army of servants is on hand to whisk away the offending article before anyone's delicate sensibilities are offended. Or at least, before anyone can prove it. For those who dare to venture outdoors, the palace gardens offer latrines of their own. These are just little sheds tucked among the topiaries, which sounds romantic until you remember there's no plumbing, and the fragrance of roses is quickly replaced by something much earthier. Courtiers whisper that the Queen once tried to host a poetry reading in the rose garden, only to have it interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a duke using the facilities behind a shrubbery. You do not want to be immortalized in verse for that. Flushing toilets do exist, sort of, but only in the most modern and exclusive rooms, and they are more for showing off than actual use. They're operated by servants who pour buckets of water down a special pipe, which is about as technologically advanced as it gets, unless you count hoping it rains soon as technology. When you're finally finished, your pot is whisked away by a servant who, statistically speaking, is plotting something. The aristocracy might be on top for now, but the revolution will be led by people who know exactly what you had for dinner last night. As you rise, powdered and perfumed, you reflect on the eternal paradox of palace life. Everything looks beautiful on the outside, but the realities underneath are, well, let's just say history has a way of flushing out the truth. You exit, composed and unconcerned, ready to pretend the whole thing never happened, just like the taxes. The king's ceremonial waking up isn't just his business. It's everyone's. Dozens of courtiers jostle for the privilege of handing him a sock. This isn't routine. It's a power struggle disguised as pajama time. Hope you brought a bribe. You think your mornings are stressful? Try waking up knowing there are 50 people lurking outside your bedroom, all desperate for the honor of fastening your cufflinks. At Versailles, sunrise means it's time for the royal lever, the most elaborate, overpopulated, anxiety-inducing get-up-and-get-dressed in human history. The king doesn't just get out of bed, he rises to a live studio audience. And you, noble by blood or luck, are one of the eager faces squeezed in the doorway, hoping to be noticed, or at the very least, not to be trampled. The day begins with a soft knock at the king's chamber. Only the highest-ranking courtier is allowed to wake him. You'd think this would be a quick, dignified process, but instead, it's a ballet of bows, whispered titles, and carefully timed sycophancy. The king is gently roused, while a group of men, most of whom spent the night rehearsing their best good morning, Your Majesty, stand in awkward, hopeful silence. First come the grand officers, the first doctor, the first valet, the first chaplain. They file in, each playing their part in the drama. The petit lever begins, with the king still tucked in bed, hair sticking out at angles that will soon be replaced by a wig larger than some village children. The chosen few are permitted to approach, their reward, a fleeting moment of royal eye contact, and, if they're really lucky, the chance to hand over a sleeve. That's right. If you play your cards right, your entire political career could hinge on how gracefully you offer the king his nightshirt. As the crowd thickens, rank becomes everything. Nobles jostle, whisper, and occasionally step on each other's toes, all for the right to hand the king his breeches or fluff his pillow. Sometimes bribes change hands, or favors are quietly traded. I'll mention your name to the duke if you let me pass you in line. If you're too far back, you might spend half an hour just watching other people pass handkerchiefs. For some, this is networking. For others, it's purgatory. Meanwhile, the king says very little. He's perfected the art of ignoring everyone while pretending to be gracious. The doctors and priests consult on his health, sometimes diagnosing him with whatever fits the mood. You're looking pale today, sire. Perhaps a lighter breakfast. Servants carry in hot towels, scented water, and, on really special mornings, a hot chocolate so thick you could use it to grout the palace tiles. Eventually, the grand lever begins, and even more people are admitted. Diplomats, petitioners, and distant cousins who heard there might be free pastries. The king sits up in bed like a weary ringmaster, surrounded by a growing semicircle of courtiers whose job is to look both attentive and invisible. If you're ambitious, you spend the entire ritual craning your neck for a sign, a raised eyebrow, a murmured aside, a sock handed just so, that maybe, just maybe, today will be your turn to shine. It's all exquisitely pointless, yet brutally consequential. Missing the levee means missing your chance to influence policy, settle a score, or simply be seen. People plot for years to move up a step in the morning's parade of flattery. Everyone knows that the hand that holds the king's shoe might, by lunchtime, be holding a lucrative appointment or a royal pardon. Finally, after an hour of this circus, the king is fully dressed, breakfast is served, and the audience disperses. You leave the royal bedroom slightly dazed, possibly bruised, and with your social standing either marginally improved or completely annihilated. All before coffee. The levee is Versailles in miniature, gorgeous, crowded, and utterly mad. You haven't just attended the king's wake-up routine. You've survived it. Congratulations. Now go change into your real clothes. The day's real battles are just beginning. Fashion at Versailles isn't about looking good. It's about looking expensive and deeply uncomfortable. Corsets so tight you can't breathe. Shoes so pointy you can't walk. And fabrics so flammable you should probably avoid open flames. And yet, everyone acts like this is normal. Every corridor is a runway. Every parlor a photo shoot. Except, the camera hasn't been invented yet. So, You'll just have to hope the right people are staring. To dress for Versailles is to become an object lesson in economic theory, physics, and the dangers of sitting down too quickly. You don't put on an outfit so much as submit to it, and the outfit always wins. First, the fabrics: silk, velvet, damask, and brocade in colors that don't even have names yet, each thread more expensive than your self-esteem. If it doesn't rustle when you walk, you're underdressed. If it doesn't reflect sunlight directly into your enemy's eyes, what's the point? And if it isn't woven by the nimble hands of a 12-year-old prodigy in Lyon, preferably working by candlelight and existential dread, it's not even worth mentioning. Next, there's the fit. Clothes at Versailles aren't designed for the shape you have, but for the shape you wish you could maintain in zero gravity. Corsets are laced tight enough to realign your personality. You're going for hourglass, but you end up at hour spent gasping for air. Women faint regularly, which is both a fashion statement and a convenient way to get out of boring conversations. For men, it's all about the waistcoat, thick, embroidered, and so stiff you could use it as a sled. The sleeves puff, the collars rise, the cuffs dangle. If your outfit isn't at risk of injuring someone during a handshake, you're simply not trying hard enough. Now for the shoes. Pointy, tiny, and with heels designed by someone who truly hated feet. You hobble, you shuffle, and if you ever actually run, you're either being chased by predators or you've caught your petticoats on fire. Because yes, everything is flammable. The candles are everywhere, on tables, on walls, clutched in trembling hands during yet another endless ball. One wrong turn, and you could take out half the guest list in a single blaze of unintentional glory. It's amazing there isn't a fire brigade stationed behind every duchess. Accessories? Prepare to jingle. Fans, snuff boxes, lace handkerchiefs, jeweled swords, garters with secret messages. There's no end to the things you must carry, hang, or pin to yourself before you're deemed dressed. For the truly fashion-forward, there are live birds, fake beauty marks, or even tiny cages holding pet mice, which, yes, is both a trend and a public health hazard. What about wigs and hair? Wigs are styled high enough to create their own microclimates, decorated with ribbons, fruits, ships, and the occasional political statement. Hairstyles are so intricate you need a full-time hairdresser, a sturdy neck, and a complete disregard for common sense. You dream of lying down, but gravity and social expectations say otherwise. Dressing takes hours, and undressing is a logistical project involving at least 3 servants and a small toolkit. Nothing says power like needing a team to help you get out of your shoes at the end of the night. Of course, once you're finally in your outfit, comfort is a memory, mobility is a rumor, and hunger is just something you ignore because eating risks staining your lace. And yet, no one complains, because fashion here isn't about comfort, it's about competition. Every detail, every thread, every embroidered lemon is a declaration of wealth, taste, and who you're trying to outshine today. Your status is measured in centimeters of ruffle and ounces of sapphire. If your look is both stunning and slightly hazardous to public safety, congratulations. You've nailed the Versailles dress code. Tomorrow, the trend will change. The discomfort, however, is eternal. Welcome to Fashion Week, every week, where comfort goes to die and fabulousness goes to the guillotine. Applying your face takes longer than reading the Bible. A thick layer of white lead, rouge, and velvet patches transform you from living to startled statue. And yes, the lead is definitely giving you health problems, but it's fashionable to look slightly ill. Your morning begins at the dressing table, surrounded by more tiny brushes, jars, and mysterious powders than your average chemistry lab. Your first job isn't to look attractive, it's to look expensive. And, if possible, like you recently escaped from a crypt. The reigning beauty ideal in Versailles is pale and haunted, as if you've spent the last 3 years sleeping in a linen closet. Sun-kissed skin? That's for people who work outside. And if you're working outside, You're either a gardener or have been exiled to the countryside for a terrible faux pas. The centerpiece of the look is the infamous white lead foundation. You apply it with a soft pad, building layer upon layer until your skin loses all memory of color, texture, and human warmth. The goal is a blank canvas, smooth, poreless, and so ghostly you could haunt the hall of mirrors and no one would notice. Is it toxic? Yes. Does it make your teeth ache and your hair fall out? Definitely. But you don't let a little thing like lead poisoning get in the way of fashion. Besides, a slightly receding hairline just gives you more room for your wig. After the foundation comes rouge, a brilliant, unnatural shade of red, carefully dotted and then smeared across your cheeks until you look both delighted and mildly feverish. The idea is to signal both health and status. Only the wealthy can afford to have skin this pale and still flush so convincingly. And if the color is a little too strong, well, just say you're still recovering from last night's party. Then, it's time for the pièce de résistance, velvet beauty patches. These tiny shapes, stars, moons, hearts, and sometimes more abstract blobs, are glued strategically to your cheeks, forehead, or chin. Officially, they're meant to cover up blemishes, smallpox scars, or mysterious spots that have appeared since your last cure. Unofficially, they're the emoji of the 18th century, each placement sending a coded message. A patch near the mouth means you're flirtatious. A patch near the eye, passionate. On the nose, you're ready to start a scandal. There are so many patches you risk running out of face before you run out of rumors. Lips and eyes don't escape either. Your lips are painted a delicate red, with natural be damned, and your eyebrows are darkened and arched into shapes that defy genetics and, sometimes, logic. Eyebrow hair not cooperating? No problem. Just shave it off and draw a new one on, half an inch higher. At Versailles, surprise is a lifestyle choice. And don't forget the perfume. Once your face is thoroughly transformed, you spritz yourself with floral waters, musks, and tinctures of things you can't pronounce. This is partly to smell fabulous, and partly to mask the combined odors of stale powder, sweat, and the slow chemical warfare taking place on your skin. Sometimes the perfume is so strong you lose track of whether you're getting dressed or being embalmed. The end result is a kind of living artwork, elegant, mysterious, and not quite real. You've spent over an hour preparing to look like you haven't slept in a year, and you're ready to face the day, or at least, to be seen from a respectful distance by candlelight. The odd thing is, after enough practice, you start to feel naked without your mask. The real you is a secret, kept somewhere under layers of rouge, lead, and willpower. By noon, your face may have started to flake, your cheeks might burn a little, and there's a non-zero chance you'll develop a mysterious cough by winter. But you look the part. An aristocrat who could drop dead at any second, and still have the best complexion in the room. And in Versailles, that's all anyone will remember. Your real job is information warfare. Courtiers trade rumors like currency, usually while pretending to admire a tapestry. The latest news? Someone's dog has a better inheritance than 3/4 of France. Welcome to Versailles, where every sentence is a strategy and every smile could be a trap. You sip your coffee, or, more accurately, you pretend to sip, because it's hard to focus with half the court craning their necks for a better view of your reaction. The morning air is thick with secrets, and you're already behind. News travels faster than common sense here, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is off limits. You start your day mingling in the hall of mirrors or along the colonnaded corridors, casually drifting from one artfully arranged group to another. Have you heard? Is the unofficial motto of the palace. A duchess whispers about a lost necklace, never mind that it turned up later in her hair. The Marquis de Blanchard is allegedly bankrupt again, which everyone agrees is impressive, considering he hasn't paid for anything in 7 years. And then there's the matter of the opera singer who accidentally set fire to the curtains during last night's rehearsal. Her prospects are suddenly both brighter and dimmer than ever. Gossip here is a weapon. Courtiers don't just share news, they launch it, aiming for maximum impact with minimal evidence. You hear about secret marriages, mysterious illnesses, forbidden romances, and the never-ending saga of the Queen's wardrobe budget. Is any of it true? Maybe. Does that matter? Not even a little. The important thing is to look, knowing, nod solemnly at every revelation, even if you're secretly trying to remember if you're supposed to hate or envy the person in question. Every conversation is an audition. When you pause before speaking, everyone leans in, hoping you'll drop a bombshell, or, even better, accidentally incriminate yourself. You learn quickly that listening is as important as speaking. Half of politics here is just eavesdropping at the right moment, preferably behind a large fern or near a conveniently echoing marble bust. Tapestries and paintings provide the ideal cover for this verbal combat. Pretend to be deeply interested in a scene of nymphs cavorting in a forest, while you're actually learning about the Comte's latest accident with his fencing tutor. Compliment a particularly ugly vase, and you might be rewarded with a whispered confession about a clandestine gambling debt. If you're lucky, someone will recite a scandalous poem disguised as a prayer. If you're unlucky, you'll get trapped in a corner by someone with an unsolicited baritone and 3 areas about how much they deserve a new position. Rumor also travels in code. The phrase, "he's feeling a little unwell," could mean anything from "he's been exiled" to "he's hiding in the wine cellar until his creditors leave town." When someone says a lady's charm is much admired, they could mean she's about to be sent to a convent. And if anyone mentions the king's new gardener, brace yourself for at least 3 theories, 2 duels, and 1 fresh batch of poetry. But gossip isn't just entertainment, it's survival. Who you know and what you know can make or break your standing. A well-timed rumor can get you promoted, demoted, married off, or, if you're especially unlucky, featured in the next public scandal. You learn to laugh politely, agree enthusiastically, and, above all, never repeat anything you can't deny under oath. By the end of the morning, you're exhausted. You've collected enough secrets to fill a small memoir, and you haven't even finished your croissant. You walk away, smiling, head swirling with plots and counterplots, secure in the knowledge that, at least for today, you're still in the game. Because at Versailles, a day without gossip is a day wasted, and possibly the last day you'll be invited to breakfast. Every hallway is a chance for betrayal, or at least for someone to criticize your shoes. The floors are marble, the walls are mirrors, and every surface reflects your own looming irrelevance. Try not to trip over a cousin. There are hundreds of them. Navigating Versailles isn't about getting from one room to another. It's about surviving a social gauntlet. The corridors stretch for miles, polished to a mirror shine by centuries of nervous shoes, powdered heels, and the occasional panicked servant running late with a tray of hot chocolate. You stride, or hobble, along, the click of your shoes echoing into infinity, your every step observed, analyzed, and occasionally mocked by passing portraits who, frankly, look better rested than you do. The problem isn't the architecture, it's the people. The palace is a maze populated by an ever-multiplying horde of cousins, uncles, in-laws, and nobles whose only known occupation is being around. Each one is ready to offer an opinion on your dress, your career, your prospects for marriage, and, if they're feeling especially helpful, your posture. Some relatives you recognize only by the color of their wigs. Others you avoid because last week they tried to marry you off to a minor count with 3 vowels in his name, and absolutely no sense of humor. But family is just the beginning. The rest of the crowd is made up of political opportunists, would-be artists, gossipy ladies-in-waiting, and gentlemen who insist on reciting terrible poetry in hopes of a royal commission. You never walk alone. Someone is always hovering a step behind or 2 paces ahead, listening for slip-ups, ready to repeat your every word in the nearest salon. Every doorway is a potential ambush. Step too confidently and you'll walk right into a heated debate about land taxes, or worse, a conversation with someone who wants to show you their new pet ferret. The walls themselves don't help. Versailles loves mirrors. You can't escape your own reflection, which seems to follow you like an unpaid bill. On good days, you can convince yourself the mirrors make the hallways brighter. On bad days, it's just you, multiplied endlessly, dressed for battle, but armed only with a fan and a polite smile. Then there are the secret passages. The king and his favorites have little shortcuts built behind the walls, perfect for avoiding awkward encounters or sneaking off for a nap. You, however, are not on that guest list. Your best hope is to follow the crowd and hope they're not leading you to an impromptu poetry reading. Sometimes you get lucky and spot a shortcut, a servant's corridor, a hidden staircase, an unlocked door behind a curtain. But taking it is risky. If you're caught sneaking about, you'll be explaining yourself for weeks, and everyone will assume you're up to something. Which, honestly, you probably are. Even the furniture conspires against you. Marble busts stare down their noses, set on plinths just waiting to trip you up. Ornate benches line the halls, each one filled with chattering relatives, wide skirts, or a stray Pomeranian with opinions. Occasionally, you see a member of the staff polishing doorknobs and pretending not to listen, but you know better. Palace servants are the original intelligence network. By the time you reach your destination, you've fielded 6 backhanded compliments, 3 marriage proposals, one from the same cousin twice, and an alarming amount of unsolicited advice about gout. Your shoes are pinching, your patience is thinning, and you still haven't remembered where you were actually headed in the first place. But you've survived. You've maneuvered past family, rivals, and existential dread, at least until lunch. In the palace of mirrors and marble, every hallway is an obstacle course. But it's also your stage. Walk on, keep your head high, and try not to step on any relatives. They're harder to get rid of than velvet lice. Lunch is not a meal, it's an event. 20 courses, half of which are jellied. The rest are just mysterious. Forks are optional, etiquette is mandatory, and if you spill anything, at least 6 people are paid to pretend it didn't happen. You don't eat lunch at Versailles so much as you endure it. As the midday bells chime, you make your way to the grand dining hall. A room larger than some villages, lined with gilded mirrors and echoing with the hungry anticipation of people who haven't tasted a vegetable that wasn't candied since last autumn. The seating chart is a labyrinth, updated hourly, based on who's in favor, who's out, and who is currently feuding over a misplaced brooch. The meal begins with a parade of servants, each more anxious than the last, carrying silver platters of food you've never seen, and, if you're lucky, will never see again. The first course arrives. Jellied eels, jellied eggs, jellied things you're not sure ever lived. Everything glistens. You try to remember when it became fashionable to make lunch look like a display at a medieval apothecary. Next up, roasted meats, stacked high and carved tableside with a flourish. If you're a fan of anything stuffed, pheasant, duck, a mysterious forest beast, today is your day. Just don't ask what's inside the stuffing. The answer is always more meat, occasionally laced with prunes, chestnuts, or whatever the chef found lying around that morning. If it moves, it gets roasted. If it doesn't, it gets jellied and passed to the left. Vegetables make a rare, heavily buttered appearance. Tiny carrots, turnips sculpted into flowers, and peas so fresh they might actually be worth eating. Everything is seasoned beyond recognition, because the only thing more extravagant than wasting food is using enough imported spices to buy a small island. Bread is abundant, white, and soft enough to cut with a glance, which is a relief since the bread knives are more for show than for use. Etiquette is the real main course. There's a right and wrong way to hold every utensil, pass every plate, and sip every drink. You do not start eating until the highest-ranking person lifts their fork, a process that can take several minutes, as everyone waits in a silent standoff for the Duchess to finish her latest anecdote about her cousin's goose. If you forget and reach for the salt too early, don't panic. Just freeze, smile, and pretend you are only admiring the grain. Forks are optional, knives are decorative, and hands are entirely acceptable for certain courses, as long as you're quick and dainty about it. You watch the king for cues. If he peels his pear with a knife, you peel your pear with a knife. If he eats it whole, so do you. If he throws it at a courtier well, that's probably a test. There are, of course, finger bowls between courses, filled with rosewater so you can cleanse your sticky, jam-coated hands before the next onslaught. As for conversation, it's a minefield. Talk too much, and you're rude. Talk too little, and you're suspicious. The safest topics are the weather, the Queen's latest hairdo, and how excellent the soup is, even if you're not entirely sure what it was made of. If you drop something on your lap, don't worry. One of the servants will sweep it away and pretend you've done nothing at all. It's the only time you'll experience mercy in the dining room. The meal stretches on for hours. By the 15th course, you can barely move. But it would be social suicide to leave before dessert. A literal mountain of pastries, candied fruit, and cream so thick you could use it for masonry. You nibble politely, feign delight, and wonder how the kitchen manages to produce so much food without anyone ever being full or satisfied. By the end, you're stuffed, exhausted, and ready for a nap, or possibly a revolution. But don't get too comfortable. Dinner is only a few hours away. Welcome to Versailles, where even lunch is an endurance sport, and the only thing heavier than your head is your stomach. You step outside into a landscape so manicured, even the trees have therapists. Miles of fountains, trimmed hedges, and marble statues, all designed to say, nature, but only if it obeys. Somewhere, a gardener is weeping. The sun glints off 1,000 polished leaves, each one clipped into submission by a small army of professional horticulturalists who are, right now, muttering about symmetry and plotting a gentle coup against the chief landscaper. The air smells like flowers, freshly cut grass, and the subtle anxiety of someone who knows they'll be up all night if a single topiary rabbit gets out of line. Birds sing, but only because they've been trained to harmonize with the fountains. Your first step onto the gravel path is a statement. Versailles Gardens aren't just pretty. They're a 2,000-acre power move. Every vista, every winding path, every absurdly expensive orange tree in a decorative pot exists solely to show visitors that the king is in charge not only of France but of gravity, rainfall, and the psychological well-being of boxwood shrubs. This is not a backyard. This is the world's largest, most stressful living room. You stroll past fountains engineered to spray at mathematically precise heights, their jets synchronized to the whims of a royal timetable and the whims of the royal plumber. If the king wants the Grand Canal to erupt on command, it will. Never mind that it requires more water pressure than most towns see in a year. The sheer volume of fountains is so overwhelming you start to wonder if Versailles was built just to make everyone else's garden feel bad about itself. Beyond the waterworks lie the hedges, snipped into right angles so sharp they could slice through bread. There's a hedge maze too, though it's less about finding your way and more about not being seen by anyone important. Rumor has it that nobles have vanished in there for hours, emerging only after negotiating treaties, planning secret romances, or, in extreme cases, eating emergency marzipan stored in their sleeves. Everywhere you look, statues stare out from their marble pedestals with that blank, vaguely judgmental expression only ancient gods and classical nudes can muster. Each one is supposed to symbolize something: virtue, victory, the inevitability of running out of budget halfway through, but you suspect most of them are just there to give lost courtiers something to blame for being late. If you listen carefully, you might hear the distant, faint sobbing of the head gardener, who keeps a detailed schedule of when every flower must bloom, wilt, and be replaced. The king once demanded winter roses in July, and, somehow, they appeared, probably with the help of several desperate florists and a lot of lying. The gardener's hands are calloused, his eyes haunted, and he knows the exact number of snails on the premises at any given time. On grand days, the gardens become the stage for royal promenades, concerts, and theatrical performances. You join the endless parade, pretending to admire a labyrinth or to marvel at a particularly symmetrical clump of violets, all while sneaking sideways glances to see if the queen is wearing something new. Everyone's trying to look effortlessly at home, but half the guests are just trying not to get lost or accidentally wander into the part of the grounds reserved for secret duels. By midday, the gravel is embedded in your shoes. The sun is making your powdered face itch, and you've gotten into 3 polite arguments about whether or not that statue is supposed to be Venus or just a really athletic shepherd. You pose by a fountain for a portrait, hoping to look serene, but the wind shifts and you're spritzed by a jet of water engineered to make the king laugh. You remind yourself, this is the price of luxury. As you head back inside, you marvel at the scale, the beauty, and the low-level anxiety that comes from knowing you are, at all times, one wilted flower away from royal disgrace. The gardens of Versailles, where nature is tamed, trimmed, and terrified. And so are you. Tired of your palace? Good news. You have a smaller palace. Marie Antoinette's private playground is filled with fake farms, expensive cottages, and enough flowers to give an allergy attack to everyone in France. You might never see a real cow, but you own several fake ones. The Petit Trianon is Versailles' answer to the age-old problem of too much palace, not enough personal space. When the main chateau feels stuffy, when the weight of powdered wigs and social expectations makes you long for simplicity, you simply retreat a few hundred meters to your own exclusive corner of excess. Here, Marie Antoinette built her vision of rustic tranquility, a sort of peasant cosplay, but with more gold leaf and absolutely no risk of manual labor. You wander through a landscape curated to look casual, but which in reality required an army of gardeners, architects, and at least 3 men whose sole job is to wrangle the decorative swans. There are winding pathways, wildflower meadows, carefully weeded by people who would rather be anywhere else, and a menagerie of animals imported for maximum visual impact. Somewhere, a rabbit is being brushed in preparation for a royal stroll. Sheep are selected for their fluffiness, cows for their photogenic profile, and chickens for their willingness to appear in portraits without pecking at the paint. The centerpiece, of course, is the hamlet, a collection of thatched cottages built to resemble a quaint village, with one key difference: no actual villagers. Instead, actors are hired to play the roles of milkmaids, shepherds, and farmhands. You can sip lemonade on a veranda and watch people pretend to churn butter, all while discussing the latest Parisian fashions. If you get the urge to milk a cow, don't worry, a servant will do it for you, then let you pose with the pail for a quick painting. It's country living, minus the mud, effort, or actual proximity to poverty. Inside the Petit Trianon itself, everything is scaled down, by Versailles standards at least. Rooms are smaller, but still extravagant. Pastel walls, delicate furniture, secret doors for the queen to escape unwanted visitors, or just particularly tedious conversation. Marie Antoinette once declared, "Let them eat cake," but here the real motto might as well be, "Let them eat decorative fruit while sitting on hand-embroidered cushions." The gardens are a riot of color, roses, lilacs, peonies, and any flower that can be coaxed into blooming out of season. They spill over stone paths, climb trellises, and burst from urns at every possible angle. Allergies aren't an inconvenience. They're a sign you've finally made it. You stroll through the blooms, fanning yourself against the combined forces of pollen and envy, all while congratulating yourself on being so natural. Tea parties are held on the grass, complete with porcelain dishes, dainty sandwiches, and enough etiquette rules to make your head spin. Everyone pretends it's casual. Nobody admits that each picnic took 6 weeks to plan, or that the pastries were delivered that morning by a chef who sprinted the entire distance from Paris. You sit on the world's softest blanket, shaded by trees that cost more than most houses, and try not to spill your chocolate. And the best part? Here, you don't have to worry about court politics. The guest list is tightly controlled, limited to the Queen's favourites, artists, musicians, and anyone who can be trusted not to gossip to the King's spies. It's a bubble of privilege within a palace of privilege. A getaway for people who need to get away from having everything. As you leave the Petit Trianon, you pause to watch a peacock wander by a fake watermill. You realize you've spent the afternoon surrounded by beauty, performance, and the gentle hum of well-paid deception. You may not know how to farm, but you certainly know how to pose like you invented it. Welcome to the Queen's version of simple living, where nothing is real and everything is absolutely, exquisitely unnecessary. You're surrounded by hundreds of servants whose only job is to witness your existence. Need someone to brush your hair? That's 3 people. Need a shoe buckle fastened? 4 more. Need privacy? Not an option. At Versailles, luxury is a group activity, and being alone is considered suspicious, if not impossible. From the moment you open your eyes to the moment you finally manage to collapse back into bed, there is someone, somewhere, standing by to help you with tasks so simple a sleep-deprived toddler could manage them. And yet, no task is too minor for an aristocrat to delegate. Why tie your own sash when you could employ a man whose grandfather tied sashes for 3 generations of minor nobility? The system is a web of hierarchy so intricate even the spiders have footmen. There are valets for your wardrobe, maids for your linens, pages for your messages, and a special attendant for the rare but inevitable accident involving chamber pots and slippery floors. Each servant reports to a more important servant, and all of them answer, at least in theory, to the house steward, who has the haunted eyes of a person responsible for 500 people, 3,000 forks, and at least 1 pet monkey in a waistcoat. The most coveted positions are those closest to your person. The lady's maid, for example, is a miracle of efficiency and discretion, able to lace a corset, mend a hem, and erase the evidence of last night's spilled wine, all while pretending not to hear a single word of gossip. Your hairdresser arrives with an arsenal of pins, powders, and 3 silent assistants, each one dedicated to a different section of your increasingly complicated hairdo. They converse in whispers and hand signals, as if assembling an aristocratic Fabergé egg. Need to get dressed? It's a group project. You stand, arms outstretched, while a battalion of attendants layers, buttons, and smooths fabric over your frame. Someone else hands you stockings. Another carefully fastens your shoes, and yet another polishes your buckles to a mirror shine. The more minor the job, the more people it requires. If you sneeze, at least 2 people are there to pass a handkerchief, embroidered, monogrammed, and replaced hourly. But it isn't just about helping you. Every servant is also a living, breathing security camera. Their eyes are everywhere, their ears tuned to the lowest murmur. Want to share a secret? Don't. Someone is polishing a candlestick nearby. Planning to slip away for a clandestine meeting? Good luck. Your absence will be noted, timed, and discussed over dinner in the servants' hall, which, by the way, is its own world of drama, feuds, and romantic entanglements more complicated than any royal marriage. Servants have their own invisible power structure. The upper ranks, the major domo, the Queen's chief lady-in-waiting, wield real influence, passing on messages, intercepting requests, and occasionally sabotaging a rival by hiding a favorite glove or misplacing a letter. Younger servants scheme to move up, while older ones know every trick, shortcut, and hiding place in the palace. If you ever want something done or undone, it's best to make friends with the staff. A well-timed bribe or a kind word to the laundry maid can smooth your path for months. Cross them, however, and you'll discover your breakfast is always late and your shoes mysteriously damp. Of course, privacy doesn't exist. You dress, eat, and even sleep under the watchful gaze of people who know more about your habits than your own mother. But if you treat them well, the staff might just help you navigate court intrigues, rescue you from social disasters, or let you know which dessert to avoid. By the end of the day, you realize that Versailles is powered not by gold or royal blood, but by the steady hands, quick feet, and sharp eyes of the servants. They know everything, forget nothing, and, if history is any guide, are quietly taking notes for the revolution. Sleep well, if you can. You're never truly alone. Monkeys in jackets, parrots that swear in 5 languages, and a lapdog wearing more jewelry than the average bishop. In the palace, animal ownership is a flex and a liability, especially when your peacock escapes into the king's breakfast. At Versailles, you don't just keep pets, you curate a menagerie designed to outshine, outspend, and occasionally outwit your neighbors. Forget barn cats or backyard chickens. Those are for peasants and, possibly, the kitchen staff. The real elite compete in a kind of zoological arms race, each determined to acquire the rarest, loudest, or most inconvenient animal the known world can offer. Your day might begin with the sound of a tiny, silk-clad monkey hurling grapes at a rival's spaniel. The monkey, of course, has a better wardrobe than some dukes. His waistcoats are hand-embroidered and, after a particularly embarrassing incident last Lent, fireproofed. Dogs come in every shape and size, but the lapdog is the ultimate accessory. Small enough to fit in a sleeve, loud enough to demand 3 servants, and spoiled enough to turn its nose up at anything but roast quail. There's even a rumor that one lady's pug once refused to walk on any carpet not dyed in the season's latest color. It's probably true. Birds are everywhere too. Parrots scream gossip from the rafters, sometimes revealing more than their owners would like. They're multilingual, unruly, and completely unrepentant about repeating the Queen's most unfortunate nickname. Nightingales serenade guests from golden cages, while canaries in jewel-studded aviaries provide a gentle, constant soundtrack of peeping and low-level chaos. Then there are the truly eccentric choices. Some nobles keep turtles with custom-fitted tiaras, or ferrets in velvet harnesses. The boldest may parade a fox on a leash, daring anyone to question their taste in companions. And, of course, the peacock, prized for its beauty, feared for its unpredictability, and infamous for its habit of wandering into places where no bird should be. One memorable morning, the king's breakfast was ruined when a particularly aggressive peacock mistook his powdered wig for a rival, resulting in chaos, feathers, and a new rule about poultry-free dining rooms. The menagerie is more than a hobby, it's a social minefield. Forget to praise someone's Italian greyhound, and you risk exile to the dullest table at dinner. Fail to control your own flock, and you may find yourself apologizing to half the court after your parrot's latest linguistic slip. Status is measured in the rarity of your animals, the opulence of their enclosures, and the amount of palace staff secretly assigned to cleaning up after them. Of course, with animals come accidents. Your monkey develops a taste for pearls and chews through your aunt's necklace. The Queen's cat goes missing, only to be discovered sleeping inside the ceremonial punch bowl. Someone's falcon escapes during an official portrait session, snatching wigs as it soars overhead. These incidents provide endless fuel for gossip, and occasional diplomatic incidents when a visiting ambassador's ferret gets in a fight with the dauphin's squirrel. Maintaining your zoo is no small feat. Food must be imported, cages scrubbed, and each creature pampered according to its whims. There's even a staff position for animal wrangler, a role filled by someone equal parts zookeeper, therapist, and amateur detective. When animals fall ill, the palace physician is summoned, more than once forced to choose between curing a spaniel's cough or attending to a minor noble's gout. The dog usually wins. As the sun sets, you find yourself surrounded by your furry, feathered, and occasionally scaly entourage. You wonder if all this effort is worth it. But then your parrot bows, your lapdog sneezes, and your monkey gives you a high five right before stealing your ring. It's chaotic, expensive, and utterly ridiculous. But in the palace, your pets are more than companions. They're proof you belong. After all, anyone can buy jewelry. Not everyone can train a peacock not to attack the king. You attend the opera, but nobody cares about the music. It's all about being seen, gossiping, and occasionally fainting for dramatic effect. The ball afterward is less about dancing and more about showing off how much you dislike everyone. The night at Versailles begins long before the curtain rises. You arrive in a carriage, already exhausted from being sewn into something with more boning than a skeleton shop. The footmen open the door, and you step onto the marble with just the right balance of grace and annoyance. The hall is alive with anticipation, but not for the overture, no. Everyone is watching the entrance to see who arrives with whom, who's wearing what, and who's managed to sneak in wearing last season's shoes. That poor soul will be talked about for weeks. Inside, the opera boxes are a battlefield of optics. The king and queen occupy the central loge, flanked by an ever-shifting court of favourites and rivals. The boxes closer to the stage are prime real estate, but only if you're willing to be seen by every bored duchess and twice bored duke in attendance. Further back, it's standing room for the merely well-born, while the unlucky must settle for craning their necks from the far reaches of the upper gallery. If you're not near the front, you simply pretend you are, and repeat whatever the person in front of you says about the plot. The music itself, sweeping arias, complicated duets, all performed by singers with names as long as their contracts, is pleasant enough. But it's really just background noise. You spend most of the show peering through your fan, trading whispered critiques, and occasionally applauding in the wrong places just to see who follows your lead. Some nights, the most dramatic performance isn't on stage but in the royal box, where a well-timed yawn or strategic cough can be worth more than a standing ovation. Of course, no opera is complete without a carefully orchestrated fainting spell. It's fashionable to swoon at particularly moving passages, real or imagined. The drama of gently collapsing into a pile of lace is a time-honored tradition, as is being revived with a sprinkle of rosewater and the subtle hope of being carried from the room by someone important. If all else fails, you can always excuse yourself to the powder room, returning in time to catch the last act and the juiciest gossip. After the curtain falls, the real show begins, the ball. The ballroom is a glittering expanse of crystal chandeliers, mirrored walls, and parquet floors polished to within an inch of their lives. Dancing is technically the main event, but nobody is really here for the gavotte. Partners are chosen as much for their strategic value as for their waltzing skills. Invitations are traded like currency, and being passed over is a fate worse than exile. You parade around the room, careful to match your expressions to the mood, bored, but not so bored that you seem ungrateful, amused, but only at the right jokes. Rivalries simmer beneath the surface. Couples circle each other with the kind of formal hostility usually reserved for peace treaties. The orchestra plays on, blissfully unaware of the dozens of small wars being waged across the dance floor. Between dances, you hover near refreshment tables, sipping champagne and pretending not to notice that the pastries have already been picked over by the ambitious and the merely hungry. Every conversation is a test, every compliment a trap. It's a game of one-upmanship in lace and pearls. By midnight, the air is thick with perfume and competition. The boldest make their exit first, hoping to leave a trail of speculation. The rest linger, desperate for one last triumph, one last scandal, or one last chance to whisper something outrageous behind a fluttering fan. You leave the ball aching in places you didn't know existed. glittering with sweat, powder, and social anxiety. The music fades, but the drama lingers. At Versailles, you never really stop dancing, you just change partners. You owe more money than you can count, but so does everyone else. Jewelry is pawned, favors are traded, and your credit is only as good as your last witty insult. Every day is a financial tightrope walk performed in diamond slippers. At Versailles, the only thing more fashionable than being rich is pretending you're even richer. Everyone owes someone, and most of them are related. The official currency isn't the livre, it's IOUs, rumor, and a half-baked promise to pay you back after the next royal wedding. You start your morning calculating how many pearls you can pawn without anyone noticing, and by lunchtime you're already plotting which cousin to hit up for a small loan. The palace runs on credit, and everyone knows it. Need a new gown? The seamstress will happily extend you a line of credit, just as long as you're seen at court in her handiwork and mention her name to the right duchess. Need new shoes for the ball? There's a cobbler who hasn't been paid in 6 months, but he's hoping you'll drop a compliment in earshot of the Queen's lady-in-waiting. The economy of Versailles is a house of cards, propped up by the hope that no one will demand actual payment until you've moved on to the next trend. Pawnshops do a brisk trade in family heirlooms. Aunt Marguerite's sapphire brooch has changed hands so many times it should have its own seat at dinner. You learn quickly how to rotate your jewelry, pawn one piece to redeem another, and never, ever wear the same diamonds 2 nights in a row. Someone will notice, and then it's all over. Even the king isn't immune. Rumor has it he once pawned his hunting trophies to pay off a particularly extravagant fete, and nobody blinked an eye. Of course, debts aren't just financial. Every favor is a transaction. Did someone secure you an invitation to last week's opera? That's worth at least 2 introductions to eligible bachelors and 3 recommendations for a seat at the next card game. If you borrow a carriage, you're expected to return the favor in gossip, influence, or, in desperate times, a prized bottle of imported Madeira. Every conversation ends with an unspoken tally. You owe, you are owed, and the balance is always shifting. If you're lucky, or just especially bold, you can bluff your way through an entire season. Throw a few lavish dinners on borrowed money, and people start to assume you're wealthier than you are. As long as you look the part, creditors hesitate. It's only when you start missing parties, wearing suspiciously simple outfits, or dodging invitations that the wolves close in. There are stories of nobles sneaking out of the palace at night, disguised as servants, to avoid angry tailors or jewelers camped at the gate. The Queen herself is notorious for running up enormous bills. Marie Antoinette's taste for fine things is legendary, and every merchant in Paris dreams of getting her patronage, though they'd settle for just being paid on time. Her shopping sprees inspire copycats among the court, driving everyone deeper into debt, but no one dares complain out loud. After all, it's much easier to join the parade than risk being trampled by it. Yet, in this world, going broke isn't the end of the road. It's practically a rite of passage. Everyone is one bad investment or unlucky card game away from disaster. Your safety net isn't your bank account. It's your ability to charm, distract, or outmaneuver everyone else with a wink and a clever turn of phrase. The truly skillful aristocrat can drown in debt for decades and still throw the best parties in France. By the time the revolution finally arrives, the nation's financial system is a pile of beautiful, unpaid bills, and no one's really sure where the money went. But until then, you strut through Versailles on a river of borrowed luxury, hoping the music doesn't stop while you're still holding the bill. It's another party. The food is endless, the wine is flowing, and someone just rode a horse into the foyer. No one is sure what's being celebrated, but everyone agrees that the cake is excellent and the consequences are someone else's problem. At Versailles, parties aren't events, they're a way of life. There's no such thing as too much when it comes to entertainment, only not quite enough. Invitations appear daily, sometimes hourly, and you're expected to accept every single one unless you've died. and even then, attendance is preferred. The more candles, the more impressive the party, which is why every gathering threatens to set new records for both wax consumption and potential fire hazards. The only thing brighter than the ballroom is your host's desperation to outdo last week's scandal. The themes are elaborate and frequently incomprehensible. Tonight might be a night in ancient Rome, complete with toga-clad nobles eating honey-drenched pastries while reciting poetry badly. Tomorrow, the Garden of Delights, featuring enough imported flowers to bankrupt a mid-sized duchy and at least one accidental bee invasion. There are masked balls, hunting feasts, midnight suppers, and impromptu concerts in every echoing hallway. Sometimes the guest of honor is a foreign dignitary. Sometimes it's the king's new dog. Sometimes no one knows for sure. But the fireworks go off anyway. Food is the main attraction and the main distraction. Courses appear in endless succession. Whole roast boars, towers of cream-filled pastries, candied fruit, jellied meats, sculpted marzipan monuments, and cheeses with so much personality they might run for office. The kitchen works round the clock, serving meals that are more art installation than nutrition. You barely taste half of it, but you pile your plate high, just in case you're being watched by someone who might mention you to the Queen. Wine and champagne flow like rivers. Goblets are refilled before they're empty. By midnight, someone is inevitably singing. Someone else is weeping, and at least one prince is under a table, explaining politics to a spaniel. There are drinking games, toasts to everything from the weather to the king's shoelaces, and the sort of philosophical debates that only arise after the 5th round of Burgundy. If you don't end the night slightly unsteady, you're either a teetotaler or simply not trying hard enough. Entertainment is everywhere and frequently hazardous. Musicians play until their fingers cramp. Jugglers toss flaming torches in rooms filled with silk drapes and increasingly nervous guests. Magicians, acrobats, and living statues drift among the crowd. There's always someone doing something they definitely shouldn't, and always someone else encouraging them. Once, a marquis attempted to juggle live ducks. History records that the ducks won, but the true spectacle is the guests themselves. The court's greatest talents are on full display: flirting, scheming, dancing, and feuding. Rivalries flare up over the choice of table linens or the exact number of sugared almonds in a favor bag. Couples exchange icy glares and even icier compliments. A single offhand remark can start a rumor that ruins a reputation before dessert. The only thing more intoxicating than the champagne is the gossip. As dawn threatens, the candles sputter low and the guests begin to drift home. Some on foot, some carried, a few wheeled out on improvised palanquins. The palace floors are sticky with spilled wine and crushed macaroons. Musicians snore in the corner. A small dog wears a borrowed tiara. And a pair of duchesses argue softly over who started the rumor about the king's astrologer. In the aftermath, no one really remembers what the party was for. But that hardly matters. At Versailles, celebration is perpetual, excess is expected, and responsibility is always left at the door. Another day, another ball, another legend written in spilled wine and candle wax. You go to sleep with cake on your breath and the vague sense that the real party, the one with consequences, still hasn't started. Marie Antoinette's rustic Hamlet is a masterclass in tone-deaf luxury. You pretend to be a shepherdess in a silk dress that costs more than most people's homes. The only thing authentic is the public resentment brewing just outside the palace gates. The Queen's Hameau de la Reine is Versailles' answer to the problem of too much civilization. A fairy tale village, built from the ground up by the finest architects in France, for the sole purpose of giving Marie Antoinette and her favorites a place to play peasant, without the inconvenience of actual peasants. The cottages are designed to look adorably shabby, with artful cracks in the plaster, moss grown by hand, and roofs thatched so perfectly you suspect each reed has its own stylist. You wander the hamlet's winding paths. careful not to trip over your gown's 12-foot train or get mud on your embroidered slippers. Chickens cluck nearby, but even they look suspiciously well-bred. Cows stand in photogenic clusters, selected for their gentle temperaments and camera readiness. There are goats, sheep, and rabbits, all managed by servants dressed as real villagers, though their hands are suspiciously clean and their accents a little too Parisian. Every morning the animals are brushed, the flower beds tidied, and the milk churned by professionals who would sooner write poetry than break a sweat. In this curated countryside, the Queen hosts tea parties, picnics, and amateur theatricals. You're invited to lounge in a dairy, which contains more porcelain than actual milk, or to pose with a spinning wheel you don't know how to use. Guests compliment each other on how effortlessly they carry their rustic baskets, which are usually empty or filled with hand-picked violets arranged by the palace florist. There's always a harpist strumming nearby and a serving maid ready with lemonade, just in case the burdens of simulated labor become too much. Marie Antoinette's favorite pastime is dressing up as a shepherdess, complete with ribboned hat, starched apron, and a crook that has never seen a single sheep. The other ladies follow suit, playing at milking cows and collecting eggs, all while servants hover just out of frame, ready to step in if anyone's manicure is threatened. You watch as the Queen feeds a lamb with one hand and accepts a strawberry tart with the other. The aesthetic is wholesome poverty, but the budget would finance a small war. To outsiders, the hamlet is a scandal. News of the Queen's play village trickles through Paris, where actual farmers are scraping by, taxed to the bone, and watching their children grow up hungry. They see the Queen's retreat for what it is: a luxury fantasy, a place where suffering is optional, and the hardships of country life can be removed as easily as a silk glove. To them, it's more than frivolous, it's an insult, proof that the nobility are not just out of touch, but living on a different planet entirely. Inside the hamlet, though, everyone is in on the joke, or at least pretending to be. You praise the taste of the homemade cheese, crafted by the royal chef, admire the humble interiors with marble fireplaces, and laugh at the antics of a goat that costs more to feed than some families make in a year. No one talks about money or politics, or the ever-growing crowds of petitioners at the palace gates. The illusion is fragile, and everyone knows it. All it takes is a stiff breeze or a stray newspaper from Paris to remind you that outside this rural dollhouse, the world is changing fast. But for now, you pour another cup of spiced milk, pose for a portrait in your peasant best, and pretend, just for the afternoon, that playing poor is enough to keep you safe. Because nothing says I understand the common people like making poverty look this expensive. Baths are rare, and when they happen, they're a spectacle. Water is imported, the tub is filled by hand, and the bathing process takes so long, you might miss 3 revolutions. Scented oils and rose petals are everywhere, but actual cleanliness is negotiable. At Versailles, the concept of getting clean is more theory than practice. Sure, the palace is packed with ornate tubs and enough fragrances to stun a rhino, but water itself is treated with suspicion. Why risk it? The pipes are ancient, the plumbing questionable, and everyone's convinced that soaking in hot water will let bad humors sneak in through your pores. For most, the safe option is to mask one day's filth with 3 days' worth of perfume and call it a victory for hygiene. On those rare occasions when you do bathe, it's a production. First, you must declare your intentions to the household, because moving a tub is a group project involving at least 6 servants, 2 footmen, and, if you're truly fancy, a personal bathing valet. The bathtub itself is less a basin and more a work of art, porcelain, copper, or even silver, complete with gilded feet and floral motifs. It's wheeled in with the solemnity usually reserved for royal processions or particularly dramatic fainting spells. Water is the main challenge. There's no turning on the tap. Instead, the servants haul countless buckets from the kitchen or garden, every drop carried up flights of marble stairs and poured with trembling arms. You can almost hear their muttered curses as they try not to spill a single splash onto your favorite rug. Hot water is even more precious. It's been boiled over an open fire, poured into the tub, and by the time it arrives, it's lukewarm and laced with the collective hopes of the staff for a generous tip. Once you finally settle in, the real performance begins. Bathing is never private. The whole point is to be seen looking luxuriously at ease. Rose petals drifting around your knees, scented oils floating on the surface, a servant standing by with a tray of candied fruit and a fresh towel. Sometimes a musician plays a gentle tune in the corner. Other times, your friends pop in to chat about politics, gossip, and the latest mishap involving the king's favorite horse. If you're especially unlucky, someone might try to recite poetry, which is almost enough to make you wish you'd stayed dirty. Soap is optional, often replaced by perfumed sachets, herbal infusions, and elaborate scrubbing mitts that look suspiciously like last year's dishcloths. You dab, rinse, and soak, careful not to let the water touch your hair. The powder and pomade would create a paste worthy of a baker's apprentice. A quick rinse, and you're done, wrapped in towels thick enough to muffle a confession. But let's be honest, for most, bathing is a special occasion. Daily cleanliness is maintained by a strict schedule of dry washing, wiping down with scented cloths, dousing yourself in cologne, and powdering every exposed inch until you resemble a slightly floral statue. The amount of effort spent not actually bathing is impressive, and the resulting cloud of perfume lingers long after you've left the room, marking your path for all to follow and possibly avoid. Of course, this fragrant facade comes at a cost. Allergies run rampant. Some courtiers are so heavily perfumed they must keep windows open even in winter. There are stories, never confirmed, of fainting spells triggered not by corsets, but by the chemical warfare taking place every morning in the Queen's chambers. When you're finally dressed and reassembled, you feel not clean, exactly, but renewed. You step out, skin faintly slick with oil and confidence, knowing you smell like a walking bouquet. After all, at Versailles, cleanliness isn't about water or soap. It's about maintaining the illusion that you are forever fresh, fabulous, and untouchable. Reality, as always, can be ignored until the next big event, or at least until someone invents plumbing that works. Meals are massive, ingredients are imported, and your palate is bored anyway. Sugar is everywhere, teeth are optional, and if you're not pickled in wine by dinner, you're doing it wrong. Digestion is left to the lower classes. Every meal at Versailles is a production, a parade of abundance designed less for hunger and more for applause. Breakfast is light, but lunch and dinner are performances worthy of an encore. The table is set with enough cutlery to require a map, and the menu is a litany of culinary ambition and reckless disregard for moderation. Start with the starters, platters of oysters, smoked salmon, and cold roast game, all arranged in dizzying symmetry. If it's not in season, don't worry. A courier on horseback has brought it from the other side of Europe, and it will arrive slightly wilted, astronomically expensive, and immediately upstaged by something even more exotic. Breads are endless, and the cheese selection could have its own royal charter. Nothing says luxury like eating Dutch cheese in France and pretending to enjoy it. Then come the main courses, a procession of meats, roast boar, whole ducks, pheasant, beef, and mystery pie. Don't ask, just eat. Everything is cooked in butter, then sauced with more butter, and finished with a flourish of truffles, nuts, or edible gold leaf. The king's favourites change with the season, but the message never does. You are rich enough to eat things other people can only dream about. If you're not slightly uncomfortable by the end of the main course, someone in the kitchen will try again. Sugar is the star of the show. Pastries, tarts, and candied fruit appear with such frequency that even your dentist has started leaving notes at your door. It's not just a treat, it's a status symbol. Sugar is so expensive and so closely associated with royalty that to refuse a second helping of marzipan is considered a political statement. Your teeth may be crumbling, but your reputation is sweet. Wine is served with everything. If you accidentally reach for water, someone will gently remind you that wine is safer, more fashionable, and, thanks to a deal with the local vineyard, cheaper than bribing your creditors. You drink red, white, sparkling, and fortified. Sometimes in the same glass, sometimes in succession, occasionally by mistake. The court's tolerance for alcohol is legendary, and the only real danger is missing your cue for a toast. To survive dinner, you must master the art of sipping, smiling, and never, ever refusing a refill. Vegetables are present but mostly ornamental. Tiny carrots glazed in honey, peas mashed into neon-colored paste, turnips disguised as flowers. If you're feeling adventurous, you might nibble a green bean. But the real purpose of vegetables is to make the next roast seem more impressive by comparison. The French diet is a celebration of indulgence, which means everything you eat should be rich, rare, and completely impractical. Of course, all this excess comes at a cost. Indigestion is rampant, and so are secret trips to the apothecary for restorative tonics that mostly taste like regret and licorice. The king himself keeps a team of physicians nearby, ready with powders, potions, and occasionally a very stern look. Nobody talks about digestive problems in public, just as nobody talks about the number of people fainting from sugar crashes in the middle of a minuet. And yet, even as you're reclining, stuffed and slightly tipsy, you're already thinking about the next meal. At Versailles, the kitchen never truly sleeps, and neither do you, thanks to the lingering effects of brandy and enough marzipan to embalm a saint. So eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow the feast starts all over again, and there's no shame in using the excuse, "the king made me do it." Every room is stuffed with paintings, porcelain, clocks, and the occasional mummified cat. Your taste is described as eclectic by people who are paid not to laugh. Buying art is a competitive sport, and you play to win. The grand salons of Versailles overflow with treasure, some priceless, some questionably acquired, and all crammed into every available space, as if your real hobby is interior clutter. Paintings cover the walls from floor to ceiling, layered 2 or 3 deep in places where one masterpiece simply isn't enough. Portraits of ancestors glare down at you, silently judging your fashion choices and your investments in Flemish landscapes. The king's collection alone could fill a small museum. In fact, it does. He just calls it his breakfast nook. Porcelain is everywhere, on mantelpieces, in cabinets, perched on gilded shelves, and balancing precariously on windowsills where the cat, not mummified, yet, will definitely knock them down. The finest pieces come from Sèvres or Meissen, their delicate surfaces painted with scenes of people doing imaginary rural chores in spotless clothing. Even your teacups have a story, and your guests are expected to nod appreciatively at the tiny painted goat herder before taking a sip. Clocks tick and chime from every corner, set to times that have no connection to reality. Having a clock is less about punctuality and more about proving you can afford to be late for everything. The more elaborate, the better. Bonus points for cherubs, nymphs, or mechanical birds that occasionally launch themselves at unsuspecting passers-by. Time is a suggestion. Style is forever. And then there are the oddities. Every noble fancies themselves a patron of the arts. But in practice, this mostly means buying anything rare, strange, or remotely valuable, then stuffing it somewhere visible. Egyptian figurines, ancient coins, seashells the size of dinner plates, and, yes, the occasional mummified pet, all meant to prove your taste is as worldly as your budget. You might not know much about Roman history, but you certainly know how to buy a statue of a Roman. Is that tapestry from Persia? Of course, never mind that it arrived via Antwerp and spent 6 months as a tablecloth. Buying art isn't just a pastime, it's a blood sport. The hottest auctions are whispered about in salons, like secret duels. Merchants and artists vie for your favor, offering private previews and the promise of exclusivity. Every new piece you acquire is another salvo in the endless, silent battle to outshine your neighbors. If you discover a painter before the king does, you're considered a visionary. If you buy something after the king, you're just another imitator. But whatever you do, never admit you overpaid. Patronage is expected. Musicians, poets, and painters haunt the palace, hoping for a glance, a compliment, or, best of all, a commission. You host private concerts in your drawing room, where everyone pretends to enjoy the latest symphony, but really just wants to gossip about the composer's hat. Theatre troupes perform original comedies, often with plots suspiciously similar to last month's scandals. If you're unlucky, you'll be immortalized in a play, usually as the comic relief. Your own tastes are, of course, unimpeachable, at least according to your paid advisors. When you unveil your newest acquisition, your friends nod with solemn admiration, while secretly wondering how you convinced anyone to sell you a clock shaped like a reclining pig. Guests leave your salons dazzled, overwhelmed, and sometimes slightly alarmed. The collecting never ends. There's always a new trend, a new artist, a new object that promises to elevate your status and clutter your antechamber. Sometimes you wonder if you're collecting art, or if the art is collecting you. But at Versailles, there's no such thing as too much. Every painting, every porcelain sheep, every slightly haunted clock is proof that you're winning the only game that really matters. Being more impressive than everyone else, even if you have to buy a pyramid of mismatched urns to do it. It's hunting season. Not because you need food, but because your reputation depends on being able to shoot a pheasant while wearing heels. The real danger is getting lost in your own backyard. At Versailles, the hunt isn't just an activity. It's a ritual, a social contest, and the best excuse you'll ever have for wearing a hat large enough to shade a small village. Everyone who's anyone is up at dawn, gathering in the grand hall, still half asleep but already trying to outdo each other with feathered bonnets, custom-embroidered jackets, and enough perfume to alarm every animal within 3 miles. The guns are polished, the boots are shined, and the dogs are so well bred they practically recite poetry. The real challenge begins before you've even left the palace. Navigating the labyrinth of gardens, lawns, and ornamental groves is an adventure, especially when you're trailed by footmen, grooms, and at least 2 cousins who will get lost before the first shot is fired. Some days, it feels less like a hunt and more like a scavenger hunt for lost aristocrats. You've heard stories of noblemen missing for hours, finally emerging from a hedge with nothing but a twig in their wig and a detailed complaint about the quality of the moss. Once you finally reach the hunting grounds, a manicured forest so controlled that even the squirrels have etiquette lessons, the games begin. Deer, boar, hares, and flocks of pheasants are carefully encouraged to appear in exactly the right spots by a network of beaters and professional animal wranglers. No one admits it, but the entire ecosystem seems perfectly choreographed, as if the animals have their own rehearsal schedule. You load your gun, or, if you're more important, let someone else do it for you, and line up with the rest of the court, all pretending you haven't secretly bribed a servant to shoo the game toward your path. For some, the hunt is a display of skill. For others, it's a display of how many people you can make do the work while you pose artistically with your musket. Either way, etiquette is strict. Don't shoot before the king, don't shoot the king, and don't shoot anything that isn't wearing at least a little fur. Miss a shot? Laugh it off and blame the wind. Hit your mark? Accept congratulations with an air of bored modesty. Then casually mention how much better you were last season. The dogs do most of the actual work, bounding ahead to flush game while you struggle to keep your hat on and your petticoats out of the mud. There's always at least one overexcited spaniel that charges after a butterfly, causing a minor stampede and several apologies. By the end of the morning, you're sunburned, winded, and covered in a light dusting of powder, half of it from your face, the rest from musket residue. Of course, no hunt is complete without a feast. Tables are set up beneath the trees, groaning under the weight of pies, pastries, and enough cold chicken to satisfy a regiment. Champagne is poured, songs are sung, and trophies are displayed for everyone to admire. If you're unlucky, someone will compose a poem about the one that got away. If you're lucky, you'll be too tired to care. The hunt is less about blood sport and more about pageantry, proving you belong, flexing your connections, and having a story to tell at dinner. It's a test of endurance, fashion, and your ability to avoid stepping in anything unpleasant. By the time you stagger back to the palace, you're exhausted, slightly tipsy, and carrying enough feathers to open a pillow factory. You haven't actually provided any food for the table, but you've secured your place at it. At Versailles, that's what counts. Surviving the wilderness, even if it's mostly populated by carefully curated rabbits and your own clueless relatives. You've heard rumors, bread riots, angry mobs, a slight uptick in pitchfork sales. Your solution? Another banquet. The best way to avoid a revolution is to pretend it's not happening, preferably while wearing more diamonds. It's impossible to ignore that something is happening beyond the gilded gates of Versailles. Or, rather, it would be if you ever went outside. As it stands, you hear the whispers between courses and the nervous laughter as someone jokes about the rabble growing bold. Your cousin insists it's nothing, just a spot of bad weather and a few ungrateful villagers who've forgotten their place. Someone else mentions that Paris is out of bread, but the kitchen still delivers a tower of pastries every afternoon. So you choose to believe it's just a rumor. Every now and then, a note arrives, a petition, a complaint, or a desperate plea for relief. You don't read them, of course. That's the Chamberlain's job. If it's really important, someone will summarize it over dessert, usually in a tone of amused disbelief. Apparently, there are families outside the palace who haven't eaten in days. The statement is met with gasps, eye rolls, and at least one comment about how unfashionable it is to go hungry on purpose. To calm your nerves, you distract yourself with the reliable comforts of palace life, endless games of cards, new dresses, poetry readings, and, naturally, more food. When the fear starts to creep in, when the sound of distant shouts or a hurried message from Paris interrupts your evening minuet, you double down on denial. If you're feeling particularly uneasy, you order another round of wine and challenge your friends to invent a new way to arrange sugar on a tart. The world outside may be crumbling, but as long as the fountains still run and the music still plays, you can almost forget it exists. The king's advisors meet in secret, whispering about shortages, taxes, and the price of flour. But at your level, the only noticeable shortage is of decent conversation. Every now and then, someone proposes a toast to the good people of France. But it always feels faintly ironic, like wishing your creditors a happy birthday after pawning their candlesticks. The Queen herself seems troubled. Her smile's a bit more brittle. Her interest in the Hamlet less enthusiastic. But nobody dares ask questions. If the palace is anxious, it covers it with laughter, silk, and a fresh coat of powder. Your fashion choices become even more outrageous. Diamonds in the daylight, pearls before breakfast. Embroidery that could bankrupt a small province. You joke that if the peasants storm the palace, at least you'll be easy to spot. No one laughs for too long. Instead, someone proposes another banquet. An evening of masked dancing, mountains of meat pies, and rivers of champagne. There's nothing a well-fed court can't ignore, especially if it's wrapped in brocade and set to music. Outside, the crowds grow louder. Guards mention disturbances on the roads, the price of candles has doubled, and the rumor mill spins faster than ever. Yet you tell yourself it will pass, just another season of unpleasantness, like a wet spring or a bad harvest. You retreat further into the routines of privilege, admiring new art, competing in the ballroom, critiquing the latest fashions. The world narrows until it's just you, your friends, and the carefully curated sound of laughter echoing through endless marble halls. By the time someone finally bangs on the gates, you're shocked, indignant, and entirely unprepared. You always thought revolutions happened to other people, people who didn't know which fork to use, or how to curtsy properly, or when to order more cake. Turns out, the world outside was real all along. But for now, there's another banquet to attend, and denial is served piping hot. The music is louder, the parties are bigger, and the sense of doom is thick enough to spread on toast. Every guest feels the tension, but no one dares say a word, until suddenly, the party stops and history crashes through the door. You arrive draped in more silk and diamonds than ever, desperate to project the image of careless luxury. The ballroom is a riot of candlelight and color, every chandelier blazing like the last gasp of a dying star. The orchestra thunders on, each note a plea for denial, each waltz a fragile promise that nothing will ever change. Guests whirl in a frenzy of powdered wigs and fevered laughter, determined to drown out the rumors that have begun to seep through even the thickest stone walls. Tonight, Versailles feels both desperate and defiant. The usual flirtations are tinged with anxiety. Every gossip, laced whisper, is a test to see who's still pretending and who's already packing. You catch snippets, mentions of unrest in Paris, of guards who look the other way, of bread that's vanished from the city's shelves. A duchess jokes that her diamonds would buy enough loaves to feed the mob, but the punchline lands flat and the conversation quickly veers back to safer ground. Shoes, scandal, the questionable merits of imported marzipan. As midnight approaches, the atmosphere grows more electric and more brittle. Dancers move faster, spinning like there's a prize for not stopping. The wine flows like denial, glasses clinking louder than the distant, ominous drumbeat outside the gates. The king and queen make their entrance, regal as ever. But their faces are pale beneath the powder, eyes darting from guest to guest, as if searching for an exit. For the first time, the orchestra misses a cue. The courtiers barely notice. They're too busy trying to memorize every detail, as if they sense this might be the last time. It's a party on the edge of a precipice. A celebration so grand it feels like an exorcism. Every moment is sharpened by the fear that any second the world you know might end, not with a whimper, but with a shout. You keep dancing, keep laughing, keep pretending. What else is there to do? Admitting fear is more dangerous than the rumors themselves. But then, the music falters. Someone bursts into the ballroom, breathless and wild-eyed. The crowd freezes, the laughter dies, and the spell is broken. It's as if the whole palace exhales at once, the sound of silk rustling against marble suddenly deafening. There's talk of revolution at the gates, of armed men demanding entry, of a mob that no amount of etiquette or diamonds can hold back. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then chaos erupts. Some guests run for the doors, clutching pearls and pastries, while others stand perfectly still, as if hoping invisibility is included in the latest fashion. You watch as the party dissolves, history arriving not as a rumor but as a reality. All at once, the fragile fantasy of endless parties and bottomless luxury crumbles, replaced by something raw and unmistakable. Fear. For years you danced on the edge, convinced the ground would always hold. Now, the floor shifts beneath your feet. As dawn breaks, the palace is silent but for the echo of footsteps, some fleeing, some advancing, all forever changed. The last party is over, and you realize, with a strange sense of clarity, that the music was never meant to last. The sun rises over Versailles, lighting up the glitter and the dust, and the only thing left to do is face the day that's finally arrived. Because in the end, every dance has its last note, and every age has its reckoning. You wake up one morning to find the palace gates surrounded. The servants are gone, the bread is missing, and everyone wants to know where the money went. You wonder if the revolution could wait until after breakfast. For years, life was an endless carousel of pastries and powdered wigs, a swirl of champagne toasts, and the pleasant hum of gossip in marble halls. But this morning, the song is different. You rise, bleary-eyed, only to discover that the music has stopped and reality has arrived, demanding payment for centuries of excess with interest. The hallways are too quiet, the usually bustling servants' quarters eerily empty. The smell of fresh croissants has vanished, replaced by the unmistakable scent of panic. Stepping to your window, you spot the crowd. Thousands of faces pressed against the iron gates, shouting slogans that make even your bravest cousin blanch. They don't want another ball, or a smile, or even a handful of gold coins tossed from the balcony. They want answers, and, if the mood strikes, possibly your head. Last night, the biggest concern was running out of imported wine. Now, you'd kill for a stale crust and a cup of anything. Panic sets in among your fellow courtiers. The clever ones are already gone, disappeared into the countryside with trunks stuffed full of jewels and hastily written letters of recommendation. The rest mill about, clutching pearls and wondering if powdered wigs are flammable. Where did all the servants go? The answer is obvious. They're with the crowd, finally tired of serving breakfast to people who never noticed when the plates ran empty. Inside, chaos is contagious. You try to act as if nothing's wrong, but even your most practiced smile is starting to crack. Someone attempts to organize a meeting. Perhaps the king will have a plan, or the queen will make a speech, or someone will remember where the keys to the wine cellar are hidden. But there's no plan for this. The system that held the palace together, endless favors, quiet bribes, whispered threats, has evaporated in the morning light. You search your rooms for valuables, but realize you already pawned most of them for last month's ball. The staff that would normally carry your trunks are gone, and the coachmen have joined the crowd. Breakfast, a memory. The kitchens are empty, the storerooms ransacked, and the only thing left on the table is a solitary candied pear, already starting to wilt. You consider eating it, but decide against it. If this really is the end, you'd rather be hungry than sticky. With every passing minute, the shouts outside grow louder, more insistent. Names are being chanted, rumors are flying, and for the first time you realize you are one of them. Someone suggests negotiating, offering concessions, apologies, maybe even reforms. Another wants to barricade the doors. A third tries to rally the court for one last party, a final stand of defiance. But nobody has the energy for dancing. The party is over, and the bill has arrived, written in angry script and delivered by a nation that's done waiting. You can't help but tally the debts. Years of excess, lifetimes of borrowed money and borrowed time, favors called in and never returned. The art on the walls feels heavier, the chandeliers threaten to crash down, and for the first time you see the palace for what it is. Not a sanctuary, but a gilded cage. When the gates finally open, it's not with a grand gesture but a tired resignation. You step out, unsure of what's next. Stripped of luxury and illusion, the crowd parts, not with fear or respect, but with curiosity. A chance to finally see the people who lived so well for so long on the edge of disaster. You wonder, briefly, if things might have ended differently, if anyone had paid the bill before it was too late. But now, breakfast will have to wait. The revolution doesn't take reservations. And history, at last, wants to be served. The king's spaniel gets its own doctor, its own menu, and, on one occasion, its own velvet-lined carriage for walks. Meanwhile, in Paris, people are arguing over breadcrumbs. The lapdogs are massaged, powdered, and serenaded by musicians while you're reminded, gently, that you still owe money to the royal stablemaster. When the peasants riot, some will swear it's out of jealousy for the poodle's manicure. Aristocratic life at Versailles means being surrounded by animals so pampered you start to wonder if you, too, are secretly a pet. Dogs parade the halls with velvet collars encrusted in tiny pearls. The king's favorites are known by name, age, and astrological sign. with detailed records kept in case a pug needs its horoscope consulted before a dinner party. Every animal is an extension of its owner's ego, taste, and competitive spirit. If your spaniel can't outshine a Marquise Italian greyhound, you might as well pack up your powdered wig and go home. Pet care is a full-time operation, and Versailles employs more animal experts than some provinces have bakers. The royal veterinarian is called doctor with a straight face, summoned at the first sign of a cough, limp, or slight emotional malaise in the king's menagerie. Last week, he prescribed chamomile compresses and a flute recital for a dachshund's melancholy. There's a chef who prepares a rotating menu of delicacies for each animal: minced chicken for the spaniels, candied carrots for the rabbits, a bit of caviar for the peacock if it's in a good mood. Each pet receives meals on its own porcelain dish, painted with its portrait, just in case it forgets who it is. Bathing is a ritual more involved than most christenings. The Queen's lapdog is washed in rainwater collected at dawn, dried on embroidered linens, and dusted with lavender powder to prevent fleas and, presumably, bad vibes. Every Thursday, a team of masseuses visits to knead away the stress of a difficult week spent lounging on silk cushions. You once watched in envy as a Papillon received a facial you couldn't afford for yourself, performed by a woman who claims to be descended from Cleopatra's personal esthetician. Entertainment is essential. Musicians are hired to play gentle sonatas during nap time, and there's always a footman on hand to toss embroidered balls across the salon. A parrot with a better vocabulary than most dukes is given language lessons every afternoon. Birds are trained to perform tricks. Cats to sit politely and not destroy the furniture, though the cats, as always, ignore instructions and still receive applause. If any animal falls ill, chaos erupts. The entire palace springs into action. Doctors are summoned, herbalists consulted, and priests put on standby, just in case last rites are needed for a guinea pig with a cold. You might wait a week for your own toothache to be seen, but the King's Spaniel gets an instant audience with 3 specialists and a personal blessing from the nearest bishop. Rumour has it the royal goldfinch once received a bloodletting. No one knows if it worked, but the physician received a promotion. For the pets, Versailles is paradise. For everyone else, it's a daily reminder that luxury is measured in paw prints and fur-lined blankets. And outside the gates, stories spread. Starving children hear tales of cats who eat better than they do, and housewives dream of a world where someone will draw them a bath, play them a tune, and never once ask for rent. When the revolution comes, people will wonder, was it the bread, the taxes, the endless wars, or was it the sight of a poodle in pearls, bowing to the orchestra, that finally convinced France that enough was enough? If history has a sense of humour, it's hiding in the lap of a king's dog, licking its paws as the world changes outside. Card games at Versailles are high stakes, high drama, and only occasionally interrupted by actual rules. You join a table for faro or quadrille, trying to look disinterested while memorizing who cheats with which sleeve. Winning means favors, losing means debts, and everyone is secretly hoping someone will overturn the table in a fit of rage, just for something new to gossip about. The salons of Versailles come alive after sundown, buzzing with the clink of crystal, low murmurs of intrigue, and the unmistakable sound of someone shuffling cards with just a bit too much confidence. Gambling is not just a pastime here, it's a way to climb the social ladder, or tumble dramatically to the bottom if you're having a bad run. You take your seat with practiced boredom, scanning the faces around you, the Duchess with the lucky handkerchief, the Marquis who can't resist bluffing, and the Count who is definitely hiding something up his sleeve, possibly last week's winnings. The games themselves are complex, and the rules seem to change based on who's currently winning. Faro, lansquenet, quadrille, piquet, each with its own arcane rituals, whispered strategies, and a book of etiquette so thick it could be used to prop up a wobbly chaise. The stakes range from modest wager, your allowance for the week, to life-altering disaster, your family's best silver and possibly your cousin's virtue. Winning, of course, means more than money. It means influence, an invitation to the best table, a coveted introduction, or simply the satisfaction of seeing a rival forced to pawn their last piece of respectable jewelry. Cheating is an art form, carried out with a wink and a smile. Some players are notorious for their magical luck, while others have cultivated a network of distracted servants and conveniently reflective mirrors. You learn to keep one eye on the cards and another on the hands, watching for signals, swapped decks, and the subtle language of fans and raised eyebrows. Everyone knows who cheats, but calling it out would be far worse than losing. Instead, you play along, adjusting your own strategies and hoping to be just clever enough to escape bankruptcy and scandal. Drama is inevitable. Someone always accuses someone else of foul play. Sometimes seriously, sometimes as a convenient excuse for losing a small fortune in under an hour. Tempers flare, voices rise, and a well-placed insult can start a feud that will echo through the palace for weeks. More than one game has ended with a table overturned, cards scattered like confetti, and at least one guest storming out in high dudgeon, vowing never to play again until tomorrow. Meanwhile, the real winners are the onlookers. For every player sweating over the next hand, there's a crowd of spectators, gossiping, judging, and taking notes for the next salon conversation. If you manage to win spectacularly, you'll be the talk of the court. If you lose everything, well, at least you'll have an audience for your humiliation. Either way, your reputation will never be the same. Winnings and debts are tracked meticulously, and the palace's unofficial economy runs on the results of last night's game. A lucky streak can pay for a new wig, a dress, or a bribe. A losing streak can ruin a family's prospects for a generation. If you're clever, you'll pay off your debts quickly and discreetly. If not, expect a parade of creditors and thinly veiled insults at breakfast. Card tables are the crucible of alliances and vendettas. Friendships are made, broken, and occasionally mended over a well-timed ace or a dramatic loss. You laugh, you seethe, you vow revenge, and all the while you wonder, is luck on your side? Or is the deck stacked from the start? At Versailles, every hand is a gamble, on fortune, on reputation, on how many times you can lose before someone writes a play about it. And if all else fails, there's always tomorrow's game. The stakes? Everything you're willing to risk, and maybe a little more. Versailles smells like 1,000 flowers had a nervous breakdown. Every aristocrat tries to outdo the next with their signature fragrance. Lavender, musk, citrus, even new scents like after the rain on Italian marble. The halls are so thick with perfume that you can barely breathe. If you faint, nobody knows if it's from passion or chemical warfare. Perfume isn't just a luxury, it's how you mark your territory. The art of scent is as cutthroat as any duel in the garden. Your daily routine involves not just selecting a fragrance, but crafting an olfactory statement, a blend designed to impress, seduce, intimidate, or simply overpower anyone within a 3-foot radius. The true aristocrat has a perfume wardrobe as expansive as their actual wardrobe. And the only thing more important than being seen at court is being smelled at court. Perfume bottles line your dressing table like little crystal soldiers, ready for action. Each one is filled with something exotic and expensive. Turkish rosewater, Venetian ambergris, Spanish orange blossom, even rare extracts supposedly gathered from the tears of nightingales. The nose you trust with your personal scent is more famous than most local poets, and certainly better paid. You receive tiny vials in the mail, each promising to make you unforgettable, or at least make people remember you at a safe distance. Dousing yourself is a ritual. A base of musk, a flourish of jasmine, a spritz of bergamot, and, just for good measure, a powdering of violet. You layer scents until you're certain your arrival in any room will be heralded by a change in atmosphere. Too subtle, and people assume you're a servant. Too bold, and you risk open windows and pointed handkerchiefs. Finding the balance is an art. And failing that, a competition. Everyone has a signature blend. And the stakes are high. Marie Antoinette's favorite concoction features rose, iris, and a hint of cedar, which means within weeks, every social climber in France is trying to copy it with varying degrees of success. The result? On some days, the corridors reek less of Versailles and more of a particularly enthusiastic flower market in July. There are whispered rumors of scent spies, servants paid to discover the Queen's latest formula and leak it to rival perfumers. Of course, perfume isn't just about smell, it's about power. Presenting someone with a new fragrance is a courtly gesture, equal parts flattery and sabotage. If you're especially cunning, you might offer your rival a sample that is, shall we say, less than flattering. Stories circulate of one duchess who accidentally wore a scent described as cabbage and despair for an entire season before anyone was brave enough to tell her. It isn't only personal fragrances that compete. Entire rooms are perfumed before grand events. Banquet halls are misted with orange blossom and clove. The king's study features a blend rumored to inspire wisdom, or at least cover up the scent of burning political documents. Even the gardens are planted to maximize aromatic impact, each flower bed a living billboard for the owner's taste and budget. The side effects are legendary. Allergies run rampant, and more than one noble has fainted at the opera, overcome not by the music, but by a heady mix of patchouli, sandalwood, and what might have been moonlit pinecone. Sometimes, the combination of clashing fragrances is so potent that diplomatic incidents have been narrowly avoided at the dinner table, and yet, to be noticed by your scent is to exist. The greatest compliment at Versailles is not, "You look well," but, "What are you wearing?" It means you have arrived, literally and figuratively. You have left your mark, on the court and on the upholstery. Perfume is both shield and sword, a way to ward off boredom, sickness, and rivals. In a world where appearances are everything, being unforgettable is a matter of survival, or, at the very least, of staying one whiff ahead of the next disaster. It's time for your portrait, a grueling, week-long ordeal of holding the same smug smile while artists and assistants debate the best angle for your chin. You're powdered, propped, and adjusted until you look more like an idea than a human being. When the painting is done, everyone must admire it. Even if you secretly suspect you've been immortalized with someone else's nose, the day begins with chaos, your maid hovering, the hairdresser armed with a battalion of pins, and the wardrobe team debating which shade of blue best complements your status, your complexion, and the latest rumor. Today's goal isn't just to look good. It's to look eternally important. You submit to the process, sitting for hours as your wig is fluffed, your ribbons retied, and your cheeks rouged to a precise shade described as vigorously alive but not dangerously so. The artist arrives with an entourage that rivals your own. Assistants to grind pigments, mix oils, and fetch endless cups of chocolate. He circles you like a slightly deranged vulture, mumbling about bone structure and capturing the soul. You'd rather he capture your good side, but you nod wisely and try not to blink. The first hour is all about finding the pose, which, in practice, means sitting on a wobbly chair while various people tilt your head, arrange your hands, and debate whether your dog, your lute, or your favorite book should appear at your feet. You're posed, repainted, and occasionally contorted in ways no human body was meant to endure. Sometimes you're instructed to look thoughtful, which means staring into the middle distance as if calculating the national debt. Other times, you're asked to look serene, though the combined pressure of 3 corsets and a burning candle upwind makes this difficult. The artist reassures you that true beauty is timeless, right before applying a dash of white paint to conceal the fatigue under your eyes. The painting begins, and so does the real test. Staying perfectly still while the room bustles around you. You discover new muscles as you attempt to keep your expression both haughty and friendly, ambitious but not threatening. Every so often, Someone suggests a break, but you're already halfway numb, and your left foot has fallen asleep beneath an avalanche of velvet. To pass the time, you eavesdrop on the assistants, who are deeply invested in your chin's symmetry. Days blur together. You sit, you pose, you try not to yawn as yet another layer of paint is added. Occasionally, the artist asks philosophical questions. What is the nature of legacy? Is the light from this window flattering or just blinding? But mostly you nod, agree, and dream of the day you'll be able to move again. The worst part is the endless parade of onlookers, relatives, rivals, would-be suitors, all drifting in to pass judgment and offer unsolicited advice. Shoulders back, more smile, less eyebrow. Even your lapdog gets bored, wandering off to nap in a sunbeam. Finally, the unveiling. The portrait is revealed with much fanfare and the kind of gasps usually reserved for opera premieres or garden fires. Everyone gathers to admire you as art. Taller, slimmer, and at least 30% more pious. The painting sparkles, your skin glows, and your nose, well, that's definitely a new feature. Still, everyone must compliment you. How regal, such dignity. A likeness for the ages. You smile graciously, determined to enjoy your legacy. Even if your grandchildren one day argue over which ancestor you actually resemble, in the end, the portrait is hung with the others, another face in a palace of faces, each one whispering a different story of vanity, anxiety, and impossible standards. You leave the room, stretching out your cramps, relieved to be flesh and blood again. But you know, for better or worse, you're preserved for eternity, a perfect version of yourself, forever holding that same unreadable smile, outliving rumors, rivals, and maybe even the palace itself. So tonight, as you drift off surrounded by pillows instead of powdered wigs, let's take a quiet moment to honor the strange, spectacular chaos that was pre-revolutionary France. Because somehow, the story of the French aristocracy is proof that there's no amount of silk, sugar, or scented candle that can truly insulate you from reality or from thousands of very annoyed people with absolutely nothing left to lose. It's easy to laugh at the endless banquets, the over-the-top parties, and the diamond-studded lapdogs. But for every ridiculous breakfast in bed, there was a lesson brewing just outside the palace windows. That ignoring the world, especially when it's on fire, isn't sustainable, no matter how many fountains you install. Yet, even as the guillotine loomed, people still danced, still gossiped, still tried to outdo each other with bigger wigs and even bigger debts. It's a little tragic, but it's also human, because history isn't just made up of revolutions and scandals, it's made up of everyday absurdities, small comforts, desperate joys, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow's problems can wait until after dessert. So as you tuck into your own very non-gilded bed tonight, maybe be grateful for hot water, indoor plumbing, and the fact that no one expects you to attend a party at dawn in a 15-pound wig. And if you ever feel like your life is too much, remember, at least you're not about to lose your head over a slice of cake. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with just the right amount of luxury and none of the existential dread. Good night.